Welcome, bookworms. This is the first episode of Eat the Bookworm. I'm your host, Abby.
And I'm your co-host, Mary. You like that?
I do like that. We should sound more sexier.
Right? The book title for today is...
Okay, well, maybe not too sexy because, you know,
There's
context.
children.
No, there's children. There's children. I was talking about the context of the book. Like, we have to be serious about it.
Okay. Well, this month's entry is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This was an Abby pick. So, Abby, why'd you pick it?
I picked this book because I remember this case being big back in 2015. And I also remember specifically reading about the case, either on Reddit or whatever social media platform I have. And I didn't know much about it. And I know this case was in the back of my mind for quite a while, and I just heard it in passing. But it wasn't until like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I actually listened to Oprah Winfrey's interview with the author of the book and listening to the entire episode, because she did have, I guess Oprah has a podcast too. I forgot what it was, but where she interviews people who probably have made an impact on society or celebrities. And I remember listening to that episode, and there were times where it was very thought-provoking, but also very sad in certain aspects. And I found out that she wrote the book. So,
You decided to kind of pick it up from there?
Yeah.
To be honest, I didn't know much about this case prior to reading the book. I'd heard about the case.
Yeah.
But I didn't know specifics at all. And I didn't keep up with the case when it was in the media.
I think mostly, I didn't hear a lot about the victim in the media. It was mostly about
the perpetrator.
Because his face was everywhere.
Yeah.
His mugshot was everywhere.
Because he was smiling in it, which I thought was creepy.
I don't think he was. No, I don't remember him smiling in the mugshot, but it looked like he was crying.
I thought he was smiling.
No, but they did have photos of him doing other things. I think he was
maybe I saw
swimming.
one of those.
Yeah, but if you don't know this book, I'm just gonna give you a brief summary about what it's about. I do want to put a trigger warning that there is a lot of talk of SA in the book, and also we may be referencing it. So if that's something that triggers you or something
that bothers you,
or it's a sensitive topic, feel free to skip those parts when we do mention it. But a brief summary of the book, it is from Goodreads.com. I'm just going to read off of here. It says, she was known to the world as Emily Doe when she stunned millions with a letter. Brock Turner had been sentenced to just 6 months in county jail after he was found essaying her on Stanford's campus. Her victim impact statement was posted on BuzzFeed, where it instantly went viral, viewed by 11 million people within 4 days. It was translated globally and read on the floor of Congress. It inspired changes in California law and the recall of the judge in the case. Thousands wrote to say that she had given them the courage to share their own experiences of assault for the first time. Now she reclaims her identity to tell her story of trauma, transcendence, and the power of words. It was the perfect case in many ways. There were eyewitnesses. Turner ran away. Physical evidence was immediately secured. But her struggles with isolation and shame during the aftermath and the trial revealed the oppression victims face and even the best case scenario. Her story illuminates a culture biased to protect perpetrators, indicts a criminal justice system designed to fail the most vulnerable, and ultimately shines with the courage required to move through suffering and live a full and beautiful life. So I remember actually reading her victim impact statement on BuzzFeed.
I never read it before this.
I remember reading it, and I know she did go a lot into detail about how she was suffering mentally, and also just, I guess, the physical effects or the aftermath of it. She really went into detail, and I really didn't realize how much it went viral. I just remember reading it on BuzzFeed when it was released.
Yeah, I didn't realize how impactful it had been, honestly, because I don't remember seeing a lot of news coverage of her victim impact statement at the time.
Yeah.
But it was, when I read it, it was very powerful and I felt like it was a judgment on not just her perpetrator, but the system itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I really liked it. I just want to give a brief little, now that we've kind of set the groundwork for the book, I want to do a brief little talk about the author. Chanel Miller was born in 1992 in Palo Alto, California. She was the eldest of 2 daughters of a Chinese mother and an American father. Her mother immigrated from China to become a writer, and her father is a retired therapist, which she references quite frequently in the book. Miller graduated from Gunn High School in 2010, and she attended the University of California, Santa Barbara's College of Creative Studies, from which she graduated with a degree in literature in 2014. So she was quite accomplished.
Yeah, and I guess, quite impactful in a way because she's close to our age.
Yeah.
Or a little bit older.
And she's technically from a minority.
Yeah.
And her parents immigrated here from China. She's a first generation.
Well, I think her mom is Chinese. Yeah. Her dad's American.
Yeah, but I mean, still like her mother immigrated.
Mm-hmm.
And then she graduated. It was so close to her graduation too, because the events that she's talking about in the book happened in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So just to give you guys a little historical context, if you read the book, she did reference an incident involving Elliot Rodger. I found a little more information about it just to give us some context. I thought this part of the book was impactful because it happened the year before her incident. And it kind of speaks to the kind of misogyny that was running rampant during the rest of the context of the book, especially with, I think you could draw a lot of parallels to the way she was treated during her trial, to some of the ideas and viewpoints that were talked about regarding the Elliot Rodger case. So I found an article from BBC that just has a brief little summary of what happened and some of the fallout after the incident. So on Friday, May 23rd, 2014, 22-year-old Elliot Rodger killed 6 people and injured 14 others by gunshot, stabbing, and vehicle ramming near the campus of the University of California, Santa Barbara, and then he killed himself. Rodger specified that he planned to target the Alpha Pi sorority, whose members he deemed the hottest at his college, the kind of girls I've always desired but never been able to have. He received a certain level of notoriety afterwards from like fringe groups. There's actually a trailer on YouTube called The Supreme Gentleman, which is like a faux mock movie trailer of him with a bunch of quotes and stuff from his social media presence and stuff like that online in his honor, which I think is weird that anyone would do that. He also has t-shirts that have his picture and the word Supreme Gentleman on it that you can still buy online. And there's actually dedicated websites where they have people who, like half the people of these fringe websites say he's a monster, and then the other half relate to him in some weird way.
Well, I would be surprised. Well, I'm not surprised, to be honest.
Right.
That there's a lot of men, particularly, who view him as this, I guess, this messiah of what it means to be masculine. And if you can't find women, or if women don't like you, then there's clearly something wrong with the woman and not the man.
Right. I think especially with this new Andrew Tate world that we're living in, this is kind of more prevalent.
Yeah, definitely.
There was a couple quotes listed on Reddit that I thought were interesting that they actually quoted in the article. One of them, "I hope this guy wrote a manifesto because he could be our next new saint."
And he got them from Reddit, which is like the misogynistic sphere of the internet. Like the misogyny on Reddit itself.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Another one was, "I will have one celebratory beer for every victim that turns out to be a young woman between the ages of 18 and 35. But seeing this kind of article being written and kind of summarizing where the world was at on their view of women at this time is very important when you're going into discussion about this book, because the incidents in the book happened just a year later from the story.
Mm-hmm.
Just to kind of like get our discussion going about the book, I do have my first discussion question. Dun, dun, dun. In the beginning of the book, the author goes through different things she did to avoid causing an issue. I'll go ahead and read a little excerpt here in a moment. And I wanted to know why she thought this was important to bring up in the beginning of the book. I think it says something that's how she wanted to start it. So I'm going to do a quick excerpt from the first page of the book. "I've never thrown my own birthday party. I'll put on 3 sweaters before I ask you to turn on the heat. I'm okay with losing to board games. I stuff coins hazardly into my purse to avoid holding up the checkout. When I was little, I wanted to grow up and become a mascot, so I'd have the freedom to dance without being seen."
I think for me, when I read it, it's more of you don't want to be an inconvenience to others. Because I know a lot of the times, especially, I think the checkout line sentence.
Yeah, I think it sticks.
Yeah,
True
that's
for
why
me.
I use card. I don't use cash. But it's just one of those things, I think, especially as women, you don't want to be an inconvenience to anyone.
Yeah, you don't want to bother anybody.
Yeah, you want to do things, you want to try to solve problems before it even becomes a problem.
Yeah.
You know?
But I'm wondering why she brought that up in the context of the book, like why that was important to bring up.
I think
maybe to show that she wasn't doing the book or even the trial for herself.
Or maybe just, I guess, in the context of a case, she was doing, in the beginning, when she mentioned all those things, she was doing them again to avoid a problem. And this is the one problem she really couldn't avoid.
Oh, yeah, I kind of like that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I know in the beginning she did keep her mouth shut about a lot of things and didn't tell family members or try to downplay it as much as possible for people.
Yeah.
Which I think anybody in her situation would do.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it comes to something like that.
Yeah, it's something that's uncomfortable.
That is also media-centric at that, because it did, the media was actually...
Yeah,
it was a high-profile case. Like, not high-profile because no one knew who she was, but it was definitely not international. I don't think it was international, but national news at that point.
Yeah.
So,
was there anything in the beginning of the book that stuck out to you?
Well, I'm trying to remember the beginning. Because I think what stuck out to me was just, I appreciated the fact that she went in to what happened when she was in the hospital.
Oh, yeah, that was pretty shocking.
Yeah. Basically, how she just woke up in the hospital and didn't know what was going on.
I felt bad for her in that moment because I hate the idea of everybody else knowing and me not knowing.
Yeah.
That something had happened. And like her description of like the way the cops were kind of not wanting to say it, but saying it.
Yeah.
Like dancing around it. That would have been so frustrating to me to realize something happened to me. They know what happened, but no one thinks that it's important to tell me. But I understand why they were trying not to influence her before they could get her statement.
Exactly. Yeah. But still, there should be, but
she was clearly unconscious, so I don't know what they expected to get either.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why they transported her to a hospital 45 minutes away from where the incident occurred.
That's a good question. I don't know anything about the logistics of
ambulance travel or anything like that.
Unless, I don't know.
Yeah, because she was surprised that she woke up in a totally different town in clothes that weren't her own. It's just bizarre. I felt, if it had happened to me, I would have felt bewildered at that point. And I felt bad for her in the book because they weren't giving her details. That was setting the groundwork for her to be able to decide that nothing happened. And they wouldn't say they didn't know for sure if something had happened or not.
Yeah, it's all just pure conjecture based on what occurred.
Like what the eyewitnesses saw. The ones who actually detained him.
Yeah. Should we go to the next question? Unless you have any more to add.
Oh, another thing that stuck out to me at the beginning of the book was a comment she made about she's a victim, but she's not Brock Turner's victim. I actually liked when she said that. Like that she was taking... Because I feel like there's always like, you don't want to be the victim. People always want to distance themselves from the word victim. But that's so disingenuous to what happened to them. And it feels dismissive almost to their pain. But I like that she wanted to make a distinction that she is a victim, but she's not his victim. She's her own person, her own, like she's not a victim of herself, but her victimhood isn't like his to own from her.
Exactly. Especially since I guess she doesn't want to feel like she's tied to him.
Yeah. And that's so sad that her name, unfortunately it will forever be tied to the person who violated her.
Yeah. Why do you think she saw her body differently after the incident?
I thought it was weird how she appreciated her body more when afterwards.
I think, because I think she does reference it in the book where Emily Doe is different than Chanel Miller. And it was like a mask she had to put on every time she would either go to court or had a talk with lawyers. And I felt like, I don't know if she appreciated her body more. I think she felt maybe even more self-conscious in a way.
Well, like in the beginning, when she first started to look at her body, she was like, this is a different body. Like, this is like, because obviously someone desired this. And I liked the analogy when I first heard it, but then it led into the mask eventually of her separating Emily Doe from herself just as much as the media was. Which, looking back on it, I don't know how helpful. I understand the reason they did it for anonymity of the victim, but the support for the victim so that they don't disassociate like this and give themselves lifelong mental health issues, I don't think that's very helpful. Because I think that them calling her a different name helped enable her to further disassociate from what happened.
I see what you're saying.
Because disassociation it can happen to anybody. I've been doing a lot of research about disassociation, and you're not aware that you're doing it until like retrospect, obviously, because she wrote this book years after the incident and everything had happened. So retrospect, she understands that she was disassociating, but I think that there was a lot of different things throughout the book that I guess we'll get into a little bit later that led to her having additional mental health problems that didn't need to be there. I'll kind of point them out as we go.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll probably talk about that, especially when you consider the impact it had on her relationship with other people.
Yeah.
Particularly, well, her sister was a big one.
Yeah, and then her boyfriend.
Who at that time he was living in a different city. So, yeah, I mean,
and I just think that the circumstances surrounding the case amplified any kind of mental health problems she was already having. So, like, it kind of leads into the next aspect of it. Well, another aspect that I found interesting about the differences of the way she saw herself afterwards was when they approached her about taking part in the trial and getting her on board with them with the state pressing charges against him, that they didn't really give her any information or about what it was going to be like going through that process. And I kind of think that's something important that they didn't give her. And I don't think they give any victim a realistic understanding of what's coming next.
Yeah, because of course, nobody wants to agree to something that they don't fully understand.
Yeah.
And I know we were talking about it before starting this episode about how it's just certain terminology that we think one way when it actually is another. Yeah,
the biggest one for you was jail versus prison.
Because when I think of jail, I think of it as synonymous to prison.
Yeah.
Like when he's in jail, yeah, he's probably in prison. Or he's behind bars. When they're two totally different things.
Yeah, just in the legal system itself, they represent two different institutions.
But not even that. But it's just like when you pursue charges, it's going to take a lot.
Yeah, like the sacrifices on her part go beyond just showing up at court every day.
Yeah.
Like she couldn't have a job. If she wanted to go to school, she probably couldn't during that time. I mean, it was affecting her sister's schooling. And then how they kept delaying the trial over and over again. I mean, I couldn't imagine the frustration, like, because you're working, like, for me, I work myself up to do things, and she works herself up for the trial, and then, like, the day of, oh, we're not doing it today, we're going to push it off.
I know. I think for anyone, that uncertainty could be soul crushing. Soul crushing. I'm trying to say that.
Soul crunching.
Soul crunching, too. But regardless.
It felt bad for her, too, when you were thinking about, like, she has to live in this moment because she still has to remember these things. She still has to talk about what happened to her.
And exactly. And I think memory is just one of those things that's very finicky. Because even trying to remember what I did last week, it's not going to be the same as it actually happening. Although what did happen was true, factual. But when you go back and try to retell it, there's always going to be pieces missing. There's always going to be things changing.
And then she'll also, I think our own memories will recast things in different light or make you doubt something that you once thought was true.
Or maybe even just like certain ideas that you never thought of. And then when you think back on it, you're like, yeah, that's what, like in this light, in this instance, or doing this differently.
Yeah. And then time always makes you see things differently. And I felt, and then she has to relive those moments over and over again to keep her mind fresh for the trial, the eventual trial that would happen at a later time. It would make me sad, too, that she kept looking into the comments about the trial.
Or just about the incident itself.
Mm-hmm. That was, oh my God, that was what we were talking about before. Like how she didn't even know what he was being charged with by the authorities. She found this out secondhand from the media, which they should have let her know what they were, I don't understand why not even just basic information was given to her by the police. Like she didn't even know if she had been penetrated with his member or with, she just said foreign object. She didn't know what that meant. Like she didn't even know when she agreed to do the trial and to agree to help the prosecution when they pressed charges, she didn't even know what he'd done to her. Like that would have been hard for me.
Yeah. Well, for anyone.
And I wouldn't have thought to ask either.
Because you don't even know what is going on. So what, if you don't know what's going on, then what questions could you ask?
I wonder if it was after this where they started doing victim advocacy, because I know that there's a group now. I don't know if it's nationwide or just local that helps people understand what's happening throughout this process.
Unless, I don't know. That's a good question.
We'll have to look into that.
Mm-hmm.
Put that in my notes for later. Victim advocacy. So then the other thing that stuck out to me kind of in the beginning of the book still, where she said the courts had kind of operated on the assumption of his innocence, which we all know you're innocent until proven guilty in the American court system. I never really thought about it in the perspective of the victim and how that would make them feel. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, in a way.
Because it just never occurred to me. I'm like, I was always so proud that our system gives everybody the assumption of innocence before, and you have to prove that they're guilty. But then the victims having to prove that they were victimized, and how like sad that is.
Because it's like everybody's doubting you until there's that evidence. Or I think even after, I think there was still some doubt.
I think there was. Because, and especially in this kind of case where it's all about intent and it's all about what she was aware of and wasn't aware of when she doesn't remember anything.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, but it was just, you know, the constant victim blaming.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, then why were you out on a Stanford campus when you don't even go to Stanford?
Yeah.
With your sister getting drunk, blackout drunk. You took how many shots of vodka? Did you have anything to eat? What were you wearing? Why were you dancing on the table?
Yeah. What did you say? Did you approach him? Did he approach you?
And I think we all know, right, as adults. And I'm hoping like even people going into adulthood would know that if there's not a clear no, then no one could consent to it, even if they're drunk.
Yeah, I think the concept of consent needs to be better explained to people. Because I feel like people will say, well, if she was drunk, I was drunk too, so that makes it okay.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing that, like, in the case that was trying to be argued. Like, well, he was drunk too. He didn't know what he was doing either.
Yeah.
But she was drunk to the point of unconsciousness.
Yeah, he was obviously still lucid enough to do what he did.
And to run away.
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that I think more than anything spoke to his guilt, is that if he thought that they were being consensual, why would he run? Like, maybe embarrassment, yeah, but then like...
You just left her there?
Yeah.
But I don't know.
There was just so many facets to the case that were just... To me, it was clear his guilt from the beginning, just because he tried to run. He wasn't being very cooperative. He immediately went on the defense with it. I think that someone reacts quickly like that when they know they did something wrong.
Exactly. Now, if it was, maybe it would have been different if he like clearly was incapacitated to the point where,
like, he passed out next to her or something and didn't even have the effort to
not
run.
that excuses it.
Yeah, but that would have made more sense to what the light he was trying to cast on himself in the trial if he had behaved differently, but that he didn't. And the victim shaming part went from the talk online and followed her into the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel bad when she found herself in this situation and then she's looking for someone else to tell her that what happened to her was fucked up.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to tell her family what's going on. So then she starts looking at social media and all she's seeing is, you're the one who fucked up.
Yeah. Like, because she doesn't have that reassurance from anyone. Maybe her sister, because her sister was the one that, like, one of the first people
who knew
because, well, they were at the party together and the hospital, the sheriff called her. And so, but other than that, like, she had no one else to lean on. Not even her boyfriend, who she didn't tell until,
much later. And even her family was much later. And I think that's an important aspect to consider too, because I think that this has a lot to do with minorities and us being silenced. I think it's a generational trauma cycle where we teach our kids to kind of suck things up and move on or to downplay it because you don't want to bother other people. Because she obviously had that mentality from the beginning of the book. And I think that it's something that we're maybe not consciously taught, but subconsciously taught from our our previous generations. I think that happens a lot with minorities. That's just me in making my own little
psychoanalysis.
Yes, psychoanalysis of minority groups.
Yeah. I think for me, when I read it, I think it was just more of like she wanted to save her parents the pain of knowing what happened. And I think that part in the book made me cry more when she finally told her parents what happened, because she was living with it for, I don't know how many months it was actually.
I think it was like 10 months or something.
It was a while.
It was a long period.
And like her parents probably heard about it, but of course they're not going to
immediately think it's her. If it was her, she would have said something.
Yeah. And that part for me got me very emotional, just because it's like, well, how do you even tell your parents that happened? Like the person in the news that is being talked about is actually their daughter, like living with you.
And that she couldn't even provide them all the answers because she didn't even know.
Yeah. So I don't know. I found that very heartbreaking.
Yeah, as for her, it's like that's tremendously heartbreaking. And like, I think that's another thing that maybe I'm putting it out there. The victim advocacy group could come and sit with you and help you figure out what you're going to say, how to say it, and get you comfortable before you have to tell other people or even be in the room with you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put that on the list. I'll make it, if they have a suggestion box, I'll drop that in there.
Yeah.
That little tidbit.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that stuck out to me was, have you ever been harassed as frequently as she described? I know she described like this daily harassment of being catcalled, comments being made to her, men trying to coerce her to like, or make her feel guilty to come and talk to them. Have you ever I don't think I've ever experienced it like on a daily basis the way she described in the book.
I mean,
I think that speaks to the culture and the environment that she was living in.
Yeah, because I guess another point that me and you were talking about is like the city we live in currently, we have to drive everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that she was living in, of course, she had to walk. And I think, and I didn't bring this up because actually I thought about it right now, is like, I don't know if, because, those things, maybe they are prevalent. Like, I don't know.
You have more interaction.
Like, and when something like that happens to you,
probably hyper-focusing on it,
yeah,
too.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, now you're noticing these men making those comments where before you just brushed it off and you're like, oh, it's fine. Or maybe now your
defenses are up. Your
defenses are up. You want to be safe. Because I know definitely I would think about that. And like, even my defenses are up now. Like, I don't even like being next to a car with a truck full of men in it. Because it has happened to me before where I was at a stoplight and like they honked. And I looked and like these guys are just like wanted me to roll down my window. And I don't know for what. And I was like, no, luckily it turned green and I went. But
I had someone at a stop sign and a stoplight come up to my car and start banging on my window and screaming at me.
I haven't had that. I mean, I've had them, well, mostly like the homeless people, like when they ask for money, but
I think he was having an episode because he was half naked.
Oh, okay. Maybe. But yeah. And I'm trying to think of other instances in my life where I felt uncomfortable. I think most of it had to do growing up, just because when your body's going through changes.
Yeah, and people start noticing.
You start noticing, you start to become self-conscious of your body because it's supposed to look this way, but it's growing out in ways that you're not expecting it to. Like, I wasn't expecting to get an ass. And I remember I used to ride the bus, and I don't know if it was a comment in passing, but one of the boys said something about my ass while I was getting off the bus, like already going home. And like, I hated getting off the bus knowing that they were behind me, like staring. So even at that, it's not like I was violated physically, but it definitely made me feel self-conscious and not safe in my own skin.
And that happened to me a lot when I would, in high school, when I would go to competitions at colleges.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously there are older men there who go to these, because we're at the high school level, you're still competing earlier in the day, but college level is right after us. So that they're already there kind of in the same areas that we are. And they'll make little comments or look up your dress as you're walking down the stairs, that kind of thing, like being inappropriate.
Yeah.
So it is violating and uncomfortable, but like now that I'm thinking about it, I just kind of accepted it as what is, and it never really like
it wasn't right to do. But as a kid, you're not told, well, growing up, they're going to make comments about your body like this and it's wrong. Growing up, it's more of like, what are you going to do to make sure that
you're not putting yourself in a position.
Putting yourself in that position, or no one's going to say these wrongful things about your body, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if...
Or it's being dismissed because they haven't done anything to you.
Exactly.
They haven't touched you.
Or I was thinking, growing up, I spent a lot of time with grandma and, of course, our tia. And, I mean, our family's pretty big. So it was just always this narrative like, well, don't wear short shorts or short dresses. Don't reveal your body too much because you don't want to be put in that position.
Yeah, you're the one who's going to call attention.
Of course, I had other cousins who were either younger or older than me, wear those things. And the negative things that grandma or tia would say about them, like they're going to grow up, they're going to be whores, they're going to be easy and fast. And like I didn't want to be that way. So of course I didn't wear the short shorts and the short dresses and the high heels and all the makeup. I was the one wearing the jeans,
the sweaters
like in 95 fucking degrees in Texas heat. Like I didn't want to show any part of I didn't even like wearing bathing suits.
Yeah, me either.
Because
I wear the bathing suit underneath like more clothes.
Yeah, I didn't even like wearing bathing suits. And as I got older, it was when I think about it, I'm like, I could have worn those things. And
none of those things be true. None of the negative shit.
But it doesn't really matter because I still have a womanly body.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what I wear. Comments are still going to be made about my body. I'm still going to be self-conscious about it. I'm still going to feel like shit if I'm not doing things to protect myself.
Yeah, and like dimming your own light and your own personality to fit so that no one gives you unwanted attention. And I think Chanel talked a lot about that in the book too, about her wanting to take ownership of herself and of her experiences and not having to deter herself from doing things like walking just to accommodate other people, which is something we talked about earlier. But now you've changed my perspective on it from earlier. So,
well, because I just think like we shouldn't have to go through all these extra steps to feel comfortable in this world.
Yeah.
Like, unfortunately, we do. And like, it's just something that we think about without even thinking about it. It just comes naturally to us. Like, ways to stay safe.
Yeah. I also like the part where she was talking about where all that stopped when she moved in with her boyfriend. That stuck out to me too, because to be honest, when I'm by myself, I do get stared at more. And I have a service animal. So when I go out in public, people look at me. They take pictures of me without
your consent
or even talking to me. And it always bothers me. But when I'm with my husband, no one does that. So it's like the male presence protects us. Like, because we're seen as his, people respect us more or not respect us, but they respect him enough to stay away.
Yeah.
It's sad.
It is.
There was a part too where she went a little into detail about her concern over Brock committing more crimes, like in response to her thinking back to what happened with Elliot.
Yeah. And I think that is what we were talking about with the probation officer. Because I don't know if you got to that part.
No, that's later. I was talking a little bit earlier where she was worried about him harming himself or doing hurting other people because he felt, I don't know, victimized himself by her taking him to court. That was a little bit earlier in the book. And that kind of stuck out to me because I wouldn't give a fuck what happened to him.
But I think she wasn't concerned about what happened to him. I think she was concerned that he may harm other people in response to the way he was being. Like, of course...
Well, she was afraid he was going to, I don't want to say the word, to himself.
Oh. Okay.
He was going to himself.
Yeah, he was going to unalive himself.
Yeah.
But I also think she felt that he was going to harm others in response to what was happening. Because, of course, she was, receiving those comments from people that it was her fault. But he also was not looking very good either.
Yeah,
I remember, I think every year actually on Reddit, the anniversary of the day it happened, Reddit, or I don't know what, some forum on Reddit says, "This is Brock Turner. Just a reminder that
he assaulted.
That he assaulted someone on this day,"
Yeah.
So I think he was also getting some kind of
negative feedback.
Yeah. And she didn't want it to be because he's receiving this negativity from the general public, I don't want him going out to harm others because he has nothing else to lose. In a way.
But I didn't understand it. Now that I'm kind of thinking about it now that we're retrospect after reading the book, I do understand it because I'm the type of person who overthinks everything and can be a little neurotic. So I can understand why her mind would go there. And also for me, the petty in me would be I don't want him doing anything stupid before I get my justice.
Oh, wow.
I'm a little aggressive.
I wouldn't have thought that far. I think for I would have been in her situation, mindset wise. I'd be
determined with figuring out everything I could about what happened if I couldn't remember. Because the not knowing would be the hardest thing for me to swallow. Everybody else seems to know what he did to me, but I don't.
Yeah.
That was sad. I also, another side note about the some of the characters in the book, I'm calling them characters, they're real people. The Swedes. How awesome was it that they saw and immediately recognized something was wrong? Yeah. How many people had probably walked past them? It was a party. They could not have been the only people who saw them.
Exactly. And they weren't even at the party. They were just riding their bikes.
Yeah.
On campus.
And they're on a college campus. There's kids everywhere. Everywhere. So to me, that was for them to actually step up and stop what was happening. And not only do that, but make sure that he stayed there until the cops could be called and arrive and then figure out the situation. The foresight to do that when so many people freeze up. And how they stuck with her through the trial too. And they also testified and they gave very compelling testimony in her trial to back her up. That was dope.
That was dope from the Swedes.
What did you think about their testimony in the trial? I thought it was very impactful.
I thought so too. I think it struck a chord with me more that they felt, I guess, saddened by the situation. Crying.
They were crying, yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's because they thought they could have done more, but I mean...
They did everything.
Yeah.
I like how she also referenced that a real man's strength doesn't just come from strength. It comes from being vulnerable, and their ability to be vulnerable during her trial really touched her.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they saw it and a part of the validating for her that something horrific did happen to her because they saw it too. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of her story, I think, was the Swedes. So another, I think we referenced it a little while ago about Chanel and her experience with setting the trial date and having to put her life on hold. I never gave any thought to something like that. When you think about victims having to go to trial with their perpetrator, and how these trials can last days or even weeks sometimes, it never even occurred to me that they're losing out on income and they're having to put their whole life on pause to do this. I don't know why that never
I think because, on the outside,
it seems to be happening quicker for us because we're not focusing on it so much and the trial is happening. Yay.
But I think even going through jury selection, we do, I don't know if you've done jury duty yet, but to me, even going to jury duty is a tedious process because one, I don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And that's only a small segment of the judicial system that we take a part of.
Yeah. And I didn't, now that you're putting it in that kind of context, it makes sense as to why it takes so long. But then it just never occurred to me that the victim had to be on hold and on standby this entire time. But they are, because they have to be made available for court. And you don't know how long court's going to be or how long it's going to last. And then there's all those hearings before you even get to a trial.
Yeah.
It's just, I never realized, I guess, until she went into detail about it, how long the process is and how extensive it is and how, her financial, she had to put her life on hold. So thank God she had savings. Otherwise, what was supposed to happen to her during this entire time? It's just sad. What did you think about her passing the time with her comedy?
I found that very endearing. Like, I don't know. I found it to be... Because you don't think about going into comedy after something like that.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a lot of where her source of strength came from, was through her comedy. Now I'm interested to see some of her comedy.
Right?
I want to see it.
I like how she put herself outside of her normal box.
Exactly. Because she seems very introverted.
Yeah. And it was surprising to me that she chose comedy to kind of put herself out there and like to do it in front of so many people. Granted, she was already on a big platform without really having to show her face because of the trial. But to be physically on stage performing in front of people, the thought of that terrifies me. So to imagine her as I wouldn't consider myself a big introvert. I don't consider myself an introvert. I'm more of an extrovert, and I would never get on stage in front of a bunch of people and tell jokes. Would you?
Oh, I've thought about it. I've actually thought about it just because it seems like fun and like...
It seems like fun to me, but I don't think I have the balls to ever do it.
And I'm pretty sure, like, looking back, I'm like, oh, that can't be made funny. Like, I can't put a comedic spin on it. But, you know, I'm pretty sure I could. But also, like, I don't know how I deal with heckling. I work with students all day.
They heckle you, I'm sure.
And I talk shit back to, like, I mean, like, appropriate.
Age
appropriate. And professionally, but I don't know.
Maybe we should try one. I want to do a poetry slam.
Oh, yeah.
Like, bam. So another thing that kind of stuck out to me during her trial was the targeted questioning from the defense attorneys and the way I felt like they were very setting her up to say something wrong.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know they do that like a lot with court cases, but I'm just like, how can you as a human look at yourself in the mirror and be okay with taunting a victim?
Well, I get it. It's their job.
They're still people. Like, I don't think I could ever be a lawyer because like I couldn't. How do you separate a person from what they've done or what's been done to them?
And I understand like you have to try to get your client
the best defense possible. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, I think more about the level of preparation she had to go through.
Yeah.
In order to be questioned.
Like that.
Like the memory stuff.
I don't even remember what I did last night that clearly.
Yeah, like, and to go back to make sure that what you're saying and you're sure of what you're saying and not doubtful. Because there are times where I think back on certain incidences in my life and I'm like, I didn't think about that before. Like, I didn't think about it before.
Or I didn't think it was important before and now it is.
And, or just some aspect that you didn't think about, either what a person said or what you were doing until after the fact.
And then like and of course, like my mind will always recast what happened in a different light with time. Like how things will seem more intense or less intense, or my mind does that on its own, I guess, to make what happened a little more bearable.
Yeah.
And just having to put yourself back in the mindset you were 10 months ago. How the hell are you ever supposed to move on?
And not only that, but like when you're intoxicated, memory, you're going to be missing fragments, you know, and you're not going to have a clear sense of what happened.
I also find myself getting lost in my memories sometimes to where like I'm questioning, did that really happen or not? Even though I know in my core it did, but my mind, because there's so much time between what happened and reality, I get lost there and I don't want to put myself back there, but you have to be able to have that recall.
Yeah.
I don't know. I couldn't be the lawyer. I couldn't be the victim.
Yeah. And I think what was astounding to me, especially when it came time for her to testify, was the fact that she had to study what she was saying.
Yeah.
That like the stuff that they recorded.
To make sure her story stayed consistent.
Yeah. And it wasn't 10, 15. It was 100 pages, at least 200 of everything that she said. Whether it was her repeating herself what she said or just anything in general.
Yeah.
And she had to study it and study herself and make sure that she got every fact correct. So that way, if she was questioned, she knew without a certainty of a doubt that it is what it is.
I know when I was reading the book, the amount of recall that she had about the different details leading up to the trial, like things that she did, places she went, conversations she had with people. I remember thinking, like, how does someone remember all this stuff? Because I would have forgotten about all of this. But then when you get into the context of the trial and like what you're talking about, where she had to remember and she had to read those transcripts,
Yeah.
It's embedded in her for life now.
I think there was one in the book when she was testifying. I know she was saying before they went to the party, her dad made, I think it was chicken with quinoa.
Mm-hmm.
You know what quinoa is?
Yeah, I know what quinoa is.
Or broccoli and quinoa. I don't remember. But the defense attorney, he said, and before you went to the party, your father made broccoli and rice. And she's like, yeah. And then it wasn't until later that she forgot that he actually made quinoa, not rice.
Gotcha, liar.
Right? And it's just like that thing where, like, if you can't even remember what you ate.
Basic, mundane things.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with what happened to her at the party whatsoever.
And you would think, like, something like that is insignificant. Like, what you ate, what your parents made before you went. Or, you know, the name of the taqueria that her and her friends went to.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even
how
know.
much you ate, what you ordered off the menu, if you changed your mind and said that out loud, you know, like little mundane things that I don't think anybody would necessarily have on their radar to remember. And she has to remember it in detail.
Mm-hmm.
And having to memorize the worst day of her life over and over again.
I think for me, that would terrify me. Yeah. Because I'm the type of person that I overthink a lot of things. And I constantly put blame on myself.
Yeah.
So just to make sure that you have everything precise.
And then feeding off of what you just said, me too, like when I'm wanting to blame myself, I'm also changing little things in my memory to fit that new narrative that it's my fault.
Exactly.
And how does she keep that sane? How does she keep sane having to relive this over and over and over and over again?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But she did, because she wrote an amazing book about it. I also noticed that the sexism in the way she was treated carried over from before the trial when we talked about it to being during the trial with questions about her clothing, her previous relationship with alcohol, her previous dating experience.
Or not even that, like how was she a party animal in college?
Like her lifestyle was being put on trial and not necessarily his. Because he was a star athlete and she's this former, you know, charity graduated. Why was she there? Mm-hmm. Like he had every right to be there. She invaded his space kind of thing.
Yeah.
That went on through the trial. That was just sad.
It was sad. And you know what? There was a part after her and her family, they did their impact statements after he was found guilty and they were doing the sentencing. And I don't know if you read, but his father went up to the podium to make his own statement. And not only was it dismissive, but he also compared her experience to only 20 minutes of action. Like, why is he going to be punished in his 20-something years of life for 20 minutes of action?
Because that's all it takes to fuck your life up,
exactly.
Dude. That should speak more to him, that he had all these amazing aspirations and he fucked it up in 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. Not that she fucked it up for him in 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I think that kind of misogyny plays into the sexism I'm talking about, where men are worthy of doubt and innocence and forgiveness, and women are masterminds who orchestrate these very elaborate situations for men to find themselves in to put them in a bad spot. And it's never the responsibility of the person to take responsibility for their actions. I think that also speaks to sexism. So that was a good point.
Yeah, it was a good point. I agree, because I made it.
Sexism. So after the trial and the sentencing was commencing, the recommendation for no prison time. I know Abby and I were talking about that off the podcast when we were kind of recapping for this episode. And Abby also didn't like that the terminology wasn't made clear to her.
Yeah, because just like Chanel, when we think of jail and prison time, we kind of think they're the same thing. They're synonymous, right? If I say someone's in jail for 6 months to a year, I'm thinking
maximum security, like prison break prison.
Or like behind bars. You don't think, like, there's no clear line between regular jail and penitentiary.
Yeah, not for
like
me.
At least made to the general public, because we all think of it as synonymous. One is the same as the other.
Yeah, I think this is just one more instance where she wasn't given the proper information and then asked to make a decision. Just like she was when the trial came about and they were asking her to be a part of the prosecution without explaining to her what exactly her role would be or the expectations for her or her family leading into it. I think this is another instance where they give her bare minimum information and then ask her to make decisions that will change the rest of her life and evidently his as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think that, like, again, this is another thing. The victim advocate should have been sitting on this call and talking her through this and helping her understand the terminology, because I wouldn't innately think that I need to do any research about the prison system if something happened to me. But I think that's becoming more and more clear during this book. And I think that if another victim were to go through something similar to her, reading this book would help them know what questions they should be asking along the way.
Yeah, definitely. But I don't know. It's just the influence of how the whole trial affected her life.
And it affected every aspect of it.
Yeah.
Like financially, the burden that she had to carry by using her savings to make herself available to the trial. Can she sue his family to get that back?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. And then how the university, in order to shut her up after the trial too, offered her that, I think it was like $150,000 to keep her mouth shut and not sue the university. And she was, unfortunately, she had to take it during negotiations because of the financial burden that was put on her and her family throughout this entire trial. And they didn't have the money or the resources to sue the university all over on top of the trial that they just went through. I know this is a little bit off topic, but it's not off topic. How in the beginning she was talking about where was her lawyer? Why wasn't there a lawyer for her to help advocate for her through this process?
I think she did have a
in
lawyer.
The beginning.
Wasn't it that Alale?
Yeah, but that was later. But in the beginning when this first happened to her, and she was, before she became part of the trial, and she was in the very, very beginning of the book when they had just asked her about joining their prosecution and being an active member of the prosecution team, she had talked about not understanding the system and wishing that she had her own lawyer at that point.
I don't think lawyers could be appointed to victims. It's usually appointed to the perpetrator, because in case they don't have a lawyer, then they get one.
Yeah, but I think that they should allow it for the victims too, just to help them get through the system. If they can't have a victim advocate, then they should be assigned a court-appointed attorney to help them walk through the system and understand their rights during the process.
That's a good point.
Because we protect the guilty. Let's protect some victims. I'm going to write to the president.
Okay.
I'll have to use big font.
Big font. Don't use Comic Sans.
Right? He won't be able to get it. I mean, he won't take me seriously if it's not Times New Roman.
Yeah. 12-point font.
Yeah. What is it? The normal margins. Don't go wide. It'll be too much words.
Yeah.
So her victim impact statement, which was delivered after she became aware that he was not looking at any real prison time. I'm inspired that she found the strength in figuring that out to step up and speak up for herself when she realized that her words were going to be used against her. Mm-hmm. So she needed to be more clear this time.
Yeah.
And as Emily Doe, Chanel wrote a victim's impact statement that went viral, reaching an audience around the world. I know Abby had read her statement before, I hadn't. But how do you feel about her statement now? I know you had read it in BuzzFeed prior to reading the book. How do you feel about it now in the context of the book?
Well, in the context of the book, I feel like it adds more depth to the situation and also to her, knowing the process she went to in the aftermath and how it affected her. It made it actually more impactful than when I first read it. Because I know I remember reading it and being so emotional. Like, I didn't experience something like that, but just to imagine going through that process and experiencing it, and then you have to make a statement in front of a judge, in front of his family. That you know is going to impact his sentencing. Then you finally have a voice at that point. Because at this point, she was just being questioned. Mm-hmm. She was being questioned about everything that happened. She wasn't allowed to say how she felt about it until now, when she's like, this is how it affected me. This is, the real me. not just some person who got victimized. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I hadn't read it before, but reading it in the context of the book, it was very powerful because I understood more her story beforehand that led to this point.
Yeah.
Like the other re-victimization that she went through throughout this entire trial process, and the havoc it wreaked on her personal life after the fact because of everything she had to put on hold and how her life had to stop, and then dealing with the depression, having to tell family members what happened to her, the shame of everything, understanding the whole of what happened to her. Because even in the media, we only saw what happened at trial.
Yeah.
And of course, what we heard about the events that happened that night, but that all that was in between the night of the incident and then the actual trial that she discusses in the book just makes that speech even more impactful, because you see her personal struggle, and the book, I think, humanizes her from a victim to a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a very powerful statement that she made. I loved the quote that she had picked and everything, or the quotes that she used in everything. I thought she's a very eloquent writer.
I also like the fact in her statement, she didn't sugarcoat anything.
Yeah.
She wanted the world to know what happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Because I think that, and especially before the trial and even during the trial, when the facts are being presented to her, they were all sugar-coated or walked around. Details weren't given. No one was talking to her straight about what happened to her. So I think that this was definitely her moment, and she stepped up and she was empowered to do what she did and have I think a very powerful moment that affected people globally. Because like we said at the beginning, it was translated into different languages. I think that victims all over I think her statement was global and universal. Yeah. And it could be anyone who experienced any kind of trauma could understand where she was coming from.
Yeah. And I think going into that, the part of the book that I enjoyed reading was like after she made the impact statement, BuzzFeed wanted to publicize it. So she gave them the approval, like, go ahead. She didn't think anything of it. But then it got, I don't know how many, 11 million views?
Mm-hmm.
Or 12 million? I don't remember. But
I think it was 11 in 4 days.
But once she found her voice, she wasn't just some person without any character. Because at this point, we didn't know like who she was as a person.
Yeah, she was still
the public
Emily
didn't know.
Doe.
She was still Emily Doe. And after that, she received letters from people basically all over the world telling her that her words gave them strength. Like they didn't feel they were alone in their own struggles, and they were able to come to terms with what happened to them, but also to find some kind of solace.
Yeah, in their pain.
Mm-hmm.
And solidarity with other people. I think that's what spoke to me a lot too, is just the impact of other people, because I also do another podcast. And the whole point is to help people have a voice in a different platform. But no one really talks about things from the perspective of the victim. It's always about the person who's perpetrating it to them, how horrible they are, and not about the strength of the person who moved on from it. Like what we talked about with Emily's story, there is a giant gap between the incident that happened to her and then the trial. No one really knows anything about the victim. So other people who I don't relate to everything that she went through, but there's aspects of her story that resonate with me. And I think that's the power of people finding their voice, like Chanel did.
Yeah, I agree.
And then the repercussions after the trial. So I was so happy when I read that Judge Persky, that's a stupid name. The judge who ruled over her case was recalled in the next election and was voted out at a vote of 62% of his constituents. I mean, living where we do and how many people vote, we don't even sometimes get to like 50%. Yeah. So the fact that there was a turnout like this to get this guy out.
Also, I think, it happened in California. So you have,
to add a little context in there.
Yeah. And I think I was telling you, I was upset because after he was found guilty, of course, there was a little cause for celebration, right? Because she didn't think that she was going to get this far, that he wasn't going to be found guilty on all 3 counts.
Yeah.
And when the judge made that decision to only sentence him to, 6 months of jail, 3 months if he was on good behavior.
Which, of course, he's going to be.
Was totally dismissive. And that was like right after she did her impact statement.
Mm-hmm. He wasn't moved at all by her words.
So, I don't know. I'm glad is he a judge still? I don't think he is, right?
I'm not sure if he still is, but at least he's not a judge in that county anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that even though she didn't get the entire outcome she wanted, more than just Brock was held accountable for their actions.
Yeah.
Which I think that's the whole point of the book, is that by speaking up, people can be held accountable. And she was a great person to do it. I mean, she's a very eloquent speaker. She was a lit major. She got this. So just as a book update, because this happened in current times, and the book was pretty recent, but it wasn't so recent that things haven't happened since, I wanted to give everybody an update, because there was a part of the book where Chanel talked about approaching the University of Stanford about making a plaque to memorialize her experience and to educate others on SA and the impact it has on their victims. And she was denied, and eventually talks stopped with the university. There was an update about that in an article from Palo Alto Online. So I'm going to read an excerpt from it now. 2 years after rejecting a quote proposed by Chanel Miller for a plaque at the Memorial Garden where she was essayed by Brock Turner, Stanford University has reversed its position and decided to use her chosen words. The provost, Paris Drell, announced her decision on Tuesday in the wake of growing public pressure in the form of petitions, faculty, Senate, and student government resolutions, opinion pieces, and most recently, 2 anonymously installed plaques with the quote Miller had originally proposed from her famed victim impact statement. It reads as follows.
You took away my worth, my privacy, my energy, my time, my safety, my intimacy, my confidence, my own voice until today.
Stanford had rejected the quote because it could be triggering for survivors of SA, prompting Miller to withdraw with talks from the university. On Tuesday, Drell said the faculty and student government resolutions, individuals reaching out to her, and a recent survey data illustrating high rates of campus SA all influenced her decision. When I read the article, I have to say that last part about the high rates of campus SA, and I was angry. Because there's so many stories like this of people being targeted or assaulted on campuses. And women, this is happening to women. I'm not saying it doesn't happen to men, but the majority of the cases I've heard about are women. And we're trying to better ourselves and move to a place of equality, and we're being targeted. And this continues. This article was written 4 years after the incidents with Chanel Miller.
Yeah. Anything I want to add? Let me see, Abby. No, I think it just speaks to the whole idea that what we were talking about earlier of how no matter how prepared we are or how much concern we have over our own safety, it's not going to prevent other people from inflicting harm on us.
Mm-hmm.
Like we could do everything in our power to make sure that we get home safely or that the doors are always locked when we enter.
We're not wearing anything too revealing.
We're not wearing anything too revealing or not being too nice because you don't want to seem flirtatious or
too cold so you don't want to seem like a bitch.
Yeah, we could do all these things to make sure that we avoid any potential threat, but it's not going to stop someone from actively doing that to us.
Yeah, and it's still high rates of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still high rates of it. So it's just, to me, it's just shocking. And I know there was another BuzzFeed article that I wanted to reference really quickly, just to kind of speak to the people who say that if she hadn't been at the party, if she hadn't wore a short dress, if she hadn't passed out drunk, that this wouldn't have happened, or it would have somehow prevented this. There was a recent article on BuzzFeed.news entitled, "A Columbia University student is suing after she was allegedly essayed twice in her dorm." In this article, it talks about Amelia Rowski-Fries, where she was actually assaulted within her own dorm room on Columbia's campus. She had requested to be moved out of her, not once, but twice.
Yeah.
She had been requested to move out, or she requested to move out of her dorm after the first incident and was denied and given red tape that she had to kind of cut through.
Well, I don't think she was denied. She just had to do all these steps to move out. Like she needed to, I guess, move out, move out 24 hours. She needed to pay $500 and her parents need to be aware of why she was moving out.
All of which I think is a violation of her. She obviously didn't feel safe anymore. It wasn't her fault. And that's just disgusting that the university thought it was appropriate to charge her with anything after something like that happened to her.
Yeah.
And then it happened again a few weeks later. So it just speaks to she wasn't at a party. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't doing anything she wasn't supposed to, or anywhere, or being anywhere she wasn't supposed to. And it still happened.
Yeah.
And ironically, she was still treated the same way by the media and by the university and was dismissed.
Well,
that's life.
It's shitty.
Yep.
But hopefully things get better.
Yeah. Janelle, I think by doing this book definitely gives a voice to these kind of situations so that people are aware that this kind of thing is happening.
Yeah.
And the widespread popularity. You said you actually seen an Oprah interview?
Oh, yeah. Did I mention that? I don't know if I mentioned it at the beginning, but yeah, Oprah has a podcast. I forgot.
Oh, yeah, you did mention it at the beginning.
Soul Conversations. I have to look it up.
You can think what you want about Oprah, but she did give her a platform.
Yeah, she did give her a chance to actually speak out, like other than the book, but just to speak out and allow more people to hear her story who wouldn't have read the book.
Yeah.
Which I think was very neat. So
the overall final thoughts on the book.
I liked it. I liked the way it was written. I know you did audiobook, but I like the way that she wrote it. She was very eloquent, especially explaining the whole process or how she was feeling in terms that I could understand and relate to.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was in the courtroom with her. I don't know if that I know that sounds so cheesy.
Yeah, because you were kind of in her mind.
Yeah, like, because you don't get that kind of perspective from something like this.
Yeah, and if you don't read the book and you're just listening to listen about the book, there's a different experience when you read books and you allow yourself to kind of get lost in the words and you can kind of put yourself in the situations that the people are experiencing. And I definitely felt that during certain parts of the book where she did a very good job of explaining what she was seeing and what she was feeling simultaneously. So it made me feel like I was there. She did read the audiobook herself. And I think that there's a difference. I'm not saying that she didn't do a good job, because she did. It's just there's sometimes when an author does the book, they give it a different tone than I imagined in my head. And I think that anyone who reads audiobooks will tell you that like sometimes the author, the way they read it can influence the way you feel about the book. And when I read it, when I had to go back after I listened to it on my Audible, because I do both, I do the book and the audiobook file, there was parts that I needed more clarification on. So I went back to my paper book to kind of read through that section again. And she wrote very eloquently. I just think that the audio file of it can be a little drawn out for me. She spoke very slow and clear, but I'm more of a, as you can tell, I rapid fire.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the only reason why I wouldn't prefer reading it again through the Audible. I think I'd want to read the actual book. But it was still a really good book.
Yeah.
I'm just being honest.
It's fine. We could take honesty. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and if other people want to read it and they're not liking the Audible book, switch to the regular book or vice versa if you want to. I mean, she does do a good job, and it can be hard for authors to read their own books.
Yeah. True.
So this was fun.
Oh my God. I was kind of worried, to be honest.
About what?
About doing the episode, because sometimes I don't know what to talk about.
No, but the conversation flowed good.
It did flow good. At least fun. I thought so. I mean, if anyone says otherwise, well,
leave it in the comments.
Yeah.
We will have a Facebook page up and kind of put some discussion questions about the book so we can kind of go back and forth with everybody.
Or if you have any suggestions on books we may want to read in the future that we have not touched, or even if we have touched,
we'll read it again.
Yeah, we'll read it again. We'll go back.
I like rereading books.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to have people reach out to us about things in the book that they caught that we didn't talk about in the podcast. Because I know there's probably aspects. This book it's not a short book. It's not a long book like it, but it's not a terribly short book. So I'm sure there's aspects of the book that maybe stuck out to somebody else that didn't stick out to us necessarily. I think everybody reads books, but everybody experiences them differently.
True. Mary, just get my book.
So we will have a Facebook page up where you can talk and let us know what you thought about the book. If there are certain aspects you wish that we'd covered that we didn't cover, who knows, maybe we'll go back on a couple episodes and touch on some of those questions live on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
So our next episode, we'll talk about all kinds of book related news, everything that's going on with books. We're going to give you the details.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks so much for listening with us. This was fun.
It was fun. I'm Abby.
I'm Mary.
And this is Eat the Bookworm. Until next time, stay hungry.
Bye.